Part 1. Into the Forest. Chapter 8. A Deal for the Rose. While I waited at the Earl's pleasure, I watched the constant bustle as servants polished the room around me. A dressmaker and her assistants arrived with great piles of expensive fabrics. For Lady Brinley? As if I'd conjured her myself, Lady Brinley came into the great hall from an adjacent corridor, laughing and surrounded by a group of servants and ladies of her acquaintance. Lady Brinley barely noticed the commotion around her. To ignore the work being done on your behalf was the privilege of wealth. I slunk closer to the wall, preferring to be invisible. But for some reason, her gaze swung my way and our eyes met. For just an instant, I saw the small girl she'd been, and remembered the easy friendship we'd had as we'd played on the edge of the forest while her mother, the Countess, bargained with my mother for something or other I couldn't remember. Or maybe I'd never known. But they'd come regularly. For a while. Until the Earl found out, I imagine now. It hadn't seemed so improbable then to the child that I was, that an Earl's daughter would be out running errands with her mother, the Countess. Or that they'd want something from my mother. Or that the Earl's daughter would be allowed to play with Catry and me. But now it struck me as very odd. I wished I could step back in time and ask Mother what that was all about. Sadly, the clearest memory was of the Earl's men showing up and dragging both the Countess and her daughter away, and calling me an ugly bastard child. I'd caught glimpses of Lady Brinley only rarely since then. The Earl kept her well hidden inside his fortress. She had grown very lovely. Her hands were folded demurely in front of her, revealing her beauty mark. But you had to know to look for it. Unlike her six-fingered father, who used his extra finger expertly and to his advantage, Lady Brinley had the merest little stump of an extra finger so fine as to be almost invisible. No wonder the Earl had such high hopes for her. Our gazes held for no more than an instant, but her eyes registered recognition and shock, and something else. Maybe guilt or embarrassment. She quickly averted her gaze, and when she swept past me, she didn't acknowledge me. After that, time dragged. I was eager to be done with my business with the Earl and back on the road before it got dark. Eager for Ree to reappear. Hoping that I would be allowed to leave, and that the Earl wouldn't arrest Catry. That he hadn't already sent a contingency of his men to take her into custody. I couldn't tell how much time passed, but I was finally summoned by a brusque servant and told to follow him. He led me down a different corridor than Ree had disappeared down. I was nearly knocked aside as the Earl's captain of the guard burst by, his face tight with anger. The servant stopped before a door. He rapped lightly, then pushed the door open. "Miss Maisie Jane Rose, my lord." I peeked past the servant. The Earl sat behind an enormous carved wooden desk, seated before a sumptuous bookcase filled with leather books. A fire blazed on the wall to his right. The room was comfortably warm, and could easily make me sleepy and dull. He was busily writing some kind of missive, his face tight with tension. "Send her in." He didn't bother to look up. The servant stepped aside to let me pass. I took a few tentative steps into the room, just enough so that the door could close behind me. As the door swished closed, Ree darted in. I could have collapsed with relief. I hadn't realized how attached I was to Ree, or how much I was counting on him to be with me, and create a distraction if it were necessary. Though I couldn't see myself escaping, no matter how large a disruption Ree caused in the Earl's office. At the same time, I wanted to chide Ree about cutting things so close, but I couldn't risk either giving his presence away to the Earl or looking like a crazy person talking to air. Not everyone believed in House Faye. I said come in, didn't I? Come closer. I don't bite. The Earl waved me closer, still not looking up. Finally, he signed whatever he was writing with a flourish, set down his pen, folded the letter and sealed it with wax and the seal of his signet ring. At last, he looked up to where I stood, trying not to cower or lose my nerve in front of his desk. His eyes narrowed as he looked at me. What's this about a rose? He sounded curious enough, but too innocent. I was certain he'd been fully briefed already, and more than likely furious that the soldiers he'd sent out after the rose had failed. Not just a rose, my lord. The Douve rose. I pulled the cheesecloth-wrapped parcel and set it in front of him on the desk. He looked at it almost incuriously, but his eyes glittered. I wondered whether it had been a mistake to toss the rose out before him so boldly. Maybe it would have been better to hold it in reserve. But what was the point of that? I didn't need his guards pawing me and feeling me up as they searched my person for it. "Why are you wearing gloves?" the Earl asked. "Is it so cold in here?" Did he think I was insulting his wealth and status? Or did he fear I was hiding an extra finger? The Earl had enough bastards in the territory. Could he think he'd sired me? "No, my lord. I wear them so as not to touch the rose with my bare hands. Unless my eyes deceive me, it's already covered in cheesecloth." "Is it so dangerous?" "It may be, my lord." I let my words dangle in the air, as if I were underplaying the rose's power and danger intentionally. I cast my eyes downward, trying to look humble, but really I was furiously thinking. It would take someone more experienced with magic, and more learned than myself to say for sure. I didn't care whether he thought me ignorant or not. It was better for me if he did underestimate me. "If you're here to try to sell me a worthless flower, you've wasted both our time. Roses are common enough." I raised my gaze and one eyebrow. "This time of year, my lord?" I spoke softly, keeping my rising anger alive just enough to cover my fear. He was playing a game with me, as if I were a mouse. But he was mistaken. I wasn't a mouse. I worried anew that he had already sent guards to retrieve Katri and bring her to be imprisoned here in his dungeon. That he was only trying to get as much information as possible from me. "Have you seen any other roses blooming then, my lord? If you have, I must compliment the garden." I tried to look demure. He sneered. "That doesn't appear to be a rose at all." "Not a whole rose. But it looks very much like what it is, a dissected rose. You can see through the cloth that it's fresh enough. And to answer your original question, I'm not here to sell you anything." I paused for drama. "I'm here doing my duty as your loyal citizen. I'm here to turn the rose into you as the ultimate authority of the territory. Even the remains of the Douve rose are far too dangerous to leave lying around. You, my lord, with your power and wisdom, will know what to do with it." My words seemed to surprise him. He stroked his mustache, though I don't think I'd managed to stroke his ego as much as hoped. "I've heard the gossip." "It's true then, you succeeded." The witch Morel was very keen to have the rose. She sent half the territory out after it, including his own men, but he didn't seem to want to admit that to me. "Now she claims it's tainted and won't get near it," he continued. "Do I have my facts right?" I nodded. "It may be tainted." "Yes." "You don't know?" he asked. He was trying to be clever, but he was clearly prying for more information. I was sure stories were already circulating. A darkling may or may not have touched it. It's hard to say for sure. I refused to cower. He studied me as if trying to figure out how a slip of young woman had retrieved the rose and outmaneuvered his much braver, stronger, well-armed, well-trained men. He gave me a little wave of his hand, his 6 fingers rippling. "Explain." Re-explored the room, while I carefully told the Earl as little as I could, while appearing to tell the whole story. I again omitted the part about the young man the fear Dorka attacked. Something kept cautioning me not to mention him. "So you can't be certain the fear Dorka did touch it?" The Earl rubbed his lip. Avarice lit his eyes. "No, my lord. I can't." His gaze ran up and down me. "It doesn't appear that you've used the rose." If he meant to cut me, he fell short. I wasn't consumed with being beautiful. Like power, beauty brought its own troubles. "No. As you can plainly see, I have not. It's far too dangerous. I'm not a risk-taker. I swallowed hard. The entire journey here, I'd been weighing whether to admit that Katri had or not. What was the safest course for all of us? Sooner or later, though, people were bound to see her or guess. His eyes lit up. But my sister has. The light left his eyes. His expression became hard. I thought you just said it was too dangerous. I did. And it is, for someone in full health. You may not be aware, but my sister is dying of the aging sickness. Which was why I risked my life going into the dew for the rose. Without a cure, she'll die soon. A few more months at most. She made the choice herself to try the magic. If the dark magic had killed her, or kills her still, she'll be no more dead than from the disease. Lord Fanger's eyes flashed. And is she? Beautiful, I mean? Of course that was top of his mind, not Katri's restored health. Which told me everything I needed to know. If Katri were beautiful, she was a threat. And the rose was something he wanted desperately. I took a deep breath, relieved for the moment to tell the full truth. No. He had a hard time hiding his pleasure. He was good with masking his thoughts, but I was equally good at seeing past the mask. The rose didn't work? Then why bring it to me and waste my time? I didn't say it didn't work at all. Katri's not beautiful, and she's not young again. Not her true age, surely. But she has a dark streak in her hair now, amongst the pure gray that had been there before. And she can move more easily and without pain than she could a day ago. She looks maybe 10 or 20 years younger. Which sounds like a lot until you realize she looked 80 or 90 before, and she's less than 20 in reality. Where is this sister of yours? Why haven't you brought her with you to prove it? I'd like to see this magic with my own eyes. I had to weigh my words carefully. What good would that do, if you hadn't seen her just before? How could you judge? She's still frail and very tired. Do you expect a 60 or 70-year-old woman to walk all the way here? His eyes narrowed. I'd been too impertinent. But he was restrained by the hope that I would give him still more information. You're free to send one of your servants to check on her and report back. Or send someone from the village who's seen her recently. There would be few to none of those. Or come yourself. The Lord of the Realm is always welcome at our humble abode. As if he would. I can have her brought to me. I didn't respond. He continued scrutinizing me. Maybe he wasn't used to honesty. Pity. What do you expect me to do with this? He pointed to the cheesecloth package on his desk. I don't have your maturity and wisdom, my lord. If it were me, I might destroy it. Alas, I have no idea how to do that safely. Or in a way that will convince the village that it's been done. I paused, staring at him unblinking. Morel had told me to bury it. But what was the sense of that, if someone could find it and dig it up? I believe its magic is weak, if not extinct. Otherwise, it would have cured Katri completely and made her beautiful beyond all imagination. The rose no longer glitters as it did when I first picked it. Ree had climbed up on a stack of books on one of the highest shelves behind the Earl. He had his back braced, poised to knock the stack over on the Earl if he had to. He made a slitting motion across his throat. Apparently, he thought I misspoke. I ignored him. By the time I got out of the forest, the rose was already in very bad shape. It's wilted more since. I made tea out of it for Katri. The dried remains of it are there, as well as the remains of the stem and the petals and leaves. That's all of it? Every piece? The Earl asked. I hope so. Petals were falling off as I ran out of the forest. I tried to get them all. I think I was successful. But I can't be sure. One may have escaped me without my notice. It was black dark in the woods. I suppressed a shudder at the memory. That's everything I have or ever have had of the rose. Lord Fanger considered me. You've heard that I've offered a reward for the rose? I hadn't heard. I really hadn't. I'd been too preoccupied with Katri to listen outside our world or pay any attention. But it didn't surprise me. He rang a bell, and a servant immediately appeared. He motioned with his 2 forefingers for the servant to come forward. My purse. The servant had anticipated his master. He pulled a small purse from his belt and handed it over, then left the room. Lord Fanger pulled out a gold sovereign and set it on the desk between us. Your reward. Did he think I'd sell so cheaply? What kind of a fool did he take me for? I don't want your coin. What I fairly offered, you should take. He pushed the money closer. I held my ground, silent. He pushed his chair back and went to a cupboard. He returned with a small bottle of his best whiskey, a medicinal size. For your sister's good health. I met his gaze. Katri was my weak spot. I wanted the lovely whiskey, in case the aging sickness returned. I swallowed hard. We still wouldn't be safe, not as long as he or anyone feared that Katri would become a beauty before the prince chose his brother's bride. In addition to what you offer, I want a ride home. And several of your guards to remain with us and protect us until after the prince and his party have left. In return, I promise that neither Katri nor I will seek the king's hand. No matter how beautiful Katri becomes, which I don't expect, neither of us want to be queen. We'll stay in our cottage far from sight. Your guards will be with us to make sure we keep our word and to protect us from anyone who still thinks we have the rose. Done. He shoved the coin and the whiskey at me. I relinquish all rights to the rose to you. I reached for the coin, relieved that I'd bargained out of him imprisoning us here. He sprang forward from his chair and gripped my wrist so tightly it throbbed, his 6 fingers pressing into my skin. How did a slip of a girl like you defeat the great Darkling? What aren't you telling me? From high on his shelf, Ree leaned against the stack of books, pushing them toward the edge. But before he could accomplish it, the fire gave a great roar and a pop. An ember the size of my palm bounced out of the grate onto the carpet and hissed. The Earl released my wrist and ran to tamp it out before it caught the entire beautiful carpet on fire. Or burned down the castle. My wrist throbbed as I rubbed it gently, watching in horror. I told you everything, my lord. I used the iron dagger. You have dozens of similar daggers hanging on your walls. He looked over his shoulder at me with gleaming eyes as the ember finally died out beneath his boot. He glared at me as if I were a witch, as if the Darkling had imbued me with darkness. Larkus. Larkus. Where is that cursed butler? I had no defense. I hadn't encouraged the fire. Ree, my protector, was staring down at us with his back still to the books, straining and shoving with a pink face. Larkus appeared, quickly taking in the scene. I'll take care of the carpet, my lord. Just at that moment, Ree managed to topple the books. They fell from the shelf, fluttering like butterflies. One solidly hit the chair where the Earl had been sitting moments before. One bounced off it. The remaining volumes flapped to the floor directly. Lord Fanger scowled and strode back to his desk with his face full of fury. He grabbed the gold coin and the whiskey and thrust them into my hands. Take your coin and be out of my sight. My guards? Yes, yes. You can wait for them in the Great Hall. Larkus, send for the captain. I have instructions for him. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. Ree bounced down the bookcase and followed us out. Did you see that? A direct hit. He was as pleased with himself as if he'd slayed a dragon. I have your back, Sorella. There is no doubt. If that fire hadn't interceded,